Welcome, everyone. I'm Fatima Venzer, and on behalf of the entire UC Santa Barbara Economic Forecast Project team and its board of directors, I'd like to welcome you to the 6th installation of EFP Informs. Just a few items before we begin. Similar to our previous webinars, this presentation is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand from either the EFP website or the EFP YouTube channel later this week. Also, for security purposes, we have disabled the number of features. Specifically, attendees cannot turn on their microphones or camera, nor can they chat with one another. Our panelists today will be speaking on the topics of jobs, housing, and small businesses. We are fortunate to be joined by the following three folks from our local community. Raymond McDonald, who is Executive Director of the Workforce Development Board of Santa Barbara County, Kathy Odell, CEO, Women's Economic Ventures, and Rob Fredericks, the Executive Director and CEO of the Housing Authority of the City of Santa Barbara. Throughout the discussion, if you have any questions for our panelists or any topics you'd like them to address, please submit them using the Q&A box located on your Zoom toolbar. Again, please use the Q&A box feature, not the chat. And so now I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of the UC Santa Barbara Economic Forecast Project and Professor of Economics, Dr. Peter Rupert.
Great, thanks you, Fatima. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity once again to be able to speak to our community. We have some great panelists, guests today. I should give special thanks, by the way, to the university for allowing us to do this. David Marshall, Executive Vice Chancellor, is a big sponsor of the Forecast Project. But today we're going to be talking to Kathy and Ray and Rob, basically about, what's going on here in our community. These are people whose boots are on the ground, I can tell you that. They are, and we're so fortunate to have them working here in Santa Barbara. They're on the front lines, they're seeing things day to day. And I think it's, very important, to get this information out as much as we can. And, I want to, start off just a little bit about talking about, what I call trickle-down effects. These closures, have affected us, very widely. And as I say here, both revenue and job loss and housing loss, has not at all been evenly distributed. And the reason that it's important to have people who are actually, whose boots are on the ground is to really figure out where the needs are and how to get the resources to those people who really need them. Very difficult problem here, obviously. And one of the big things is that, this has hit kind of the most vulnerable people in our community and around the globe, actually. And just one quick example that, by the way, these slides will all be available. We're going to have resources put up, so you'll be able to get them on the UCSB Forecast Project site. And I think maybe Kathy, Ray, and Rob, they may put them on theirs as well. But one of the things that, I think that it's, we don't really see very much, and unless you really pay attention, here's an example of what I mean by trickle-down effects. So what's basically happened is that over time, and this article from the Wall Street Journal, it basically says that coronavirus threatens to push the childcare industry over the edge. And what they say in this article is roughly 40% of all childcare centers have closed, and those that have remained open are only servicing about half the people they used to. So what this means is that many of those who need to go to work maybe can't go to work because there's no place to put their children. So it's going to impact employment for a long time, and of course it's going to impact our children for a long time. And so these are the kind of things that I think, unless you really are down deep into the weeds, you're not really understanding. So I think it's really important that all of us realize, many of these effects can be going on without us even knowing it. So I have a new term, which I'm calling before the COVID era. That's BCE, as some of you have known about it. And so what we're going to do today is basically have a, what I call a fairly informal discussion. We're going to try to get to some of the causes of what we're seeing with each of these individuals. And so I'm going to ask, sort of, right away, so what were we seeing before COVID really hit? So let's start with Rob Fredericks. Talk a little about what we've been seeing and what you were doing, right before COVID.
Thanks, Peter. So good afternoon now, everyone. Obviously before COVID, BCE, the entire economic landscape was different, and the employment rate was much better, and our frontline workers, service industry workers were doing pretty well. But there was a housing crisis in California, and including in Santa Barbara. Statewide, we had a deficit of about 3 million homes, and that's needed, and that remains to this day. So the Housing Authority, our charge is to provide affordable housing that's needed in the city of Santa Barbara. You have two housing authorities. You have the County Housing Authority, and you have our City Housing Authority, and both do really good work. We provide about 2,600 rental assistance vouchers to the private landlord community, and we have about 1,370 hard units that we own and manage in the city of Santa Barbara. So we're essentially the largest landlord on the south coast of Santa Barbara County. And what we've noticed, our residents and they were doing pretty well. But all of that massively changed in March, where people lost their jobs, and we had to do interim rent adjustments because the people on our programs, they pay a percentage of their income for rent. So we had to quickly change all of those rents that people were paying. The pictures that you see up here right now are two developments that we finished in the time of COVID. The Gardens on Hope on the left is 89 senior units on Hope Avenue, just across the creek from La Cumbra Plaza, and that's serving low-income seniors, frail low-income seniors, and for about $850 a month. They have their own apartment, and they receive 3 meals a day, housekeeping services, and supportive services. And we were able to move in about 35 seniors that were literally homeless, living on the streets or in their vehicle, through our assistance with the Santa Barbara County's Project Room Key through the state to get these seniors housed. Johnson Court on the right of your screen there was a development that we finished right when COVID hit as well, and that's 17 units for homeless veterans. So we're proud of that, of these developments, and it goes to show that what you can still do. There's a great need for these developments still, and we're trying to meet that need, but it's more difficult with funding resources drying up here in throughout the country and the state. There's less discretionary resources from local governments now to give to housing authorities to make these developments happen. So I'll leave it at that. Don't want to take up too much airtime.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, what were you seeing right before COVID was hitting?
Businesses, just before COVID was hit, we were seeing that businesses were starting to slow down a little bit. Our reports were coming in that revenues had declined slightly in the first quarter, and our small business owners were cautiously optimistic. We had, as everybody did, some businesses who were doing very well. Surprisingly, most of our restaurants were doing very well before COVID hit. and then got hit very hard. Retail was the one that was the hardest hit for us. That we're struggling, but they have been struggling for 6 to 8 months prior to COVID. So it was very hard to see what would have happened had COVID not hit at this point in time. And if we stick to pre-COVID right now, that's about where we were. Nothing different than what we were seeing nationally. No specific soft spots, just general caution. Q1.
Right. Great, thanks. And Ray, what were you seeing workforce-wise?
Okay, I have to mute here. I understand that there's some feedback coming in from my end, so hopefully everyone can hear me and there's not too much static going on. But to answer your question, Peter, that's a very good question. We were doing pretty good prior to COVID hitting. We had a number of sustainable months of unemployment that was around the 6% and lower level, which is really great for our community. So that meant that most people who wanted to work were able to find jobs. It might not be the job that they wanted, but they were able to find jobs. And so what we were doing in the workforce community is that we were trying to work with the employers as well as those last final folks who had a lot needed a lot more attention to find the jobs, working with the employers to expand the way that they were working with the new hires so that they could hire these final folks. So that was where we were just as we were leading into March. Then March hit. And we spiked up to around 13% unemployment rate. The shutdown happened. Folks were no longer able to go to work. They were no longer able to put their kids, as you mentioned earlier, Peter, in childcare. And so life changed as we knew it. And we're still seeing a little bit of that now. And I don't know if I need to go into that just yet, but the major point that I would make right now is that prior to COVID hitting, folks in Santa Barbara County who had some skills, some marketable skills, were able to find an employer who could employ them. And employers were able to find the workforce that they basically needed and were able to move forward with that. So
Got it.
That's where I'll stop.
Okay, yeah. So, like the rest of the economy, Santa Barbara was strong. We continued to grow. Maybe hit a little bit of a slowdown coming into the new year. And so the question is, so where are we now? So first we can talk a little bit about, COVID cases. And, basically, you can go to these links again and you can see, in terms of COVID cases, the Santa Barbara Public Health or Cottage Hospital has various dashboards you can look at. Things have eased off a little bit. We glided into risk level red out of purple, and so things are changing slowly as we go. One of the big questions, of course, is, are we going to get a vaccine? And I think for many that was plan A. I'm not as I tell everybody, I'm not a forecaster, but I think that plan A should now become plan B. There are lots of evidence out there that this is going to be slower than many have thought. Again, here's a link that's a very nice article on just came out in the Atlantic about what it really means to do these vaccine trials. And I think many people have read, for example, that Johnson & Johnson has paused their trial. By the way, because COVID, is so in front of our face all the time, these trials go on all the time outside of COVID, testing for vaccines. Pauses happen very often. So just because you hear a pause doesn't mean that, that's not going to happen. It just means that things may get delayed a little bit. Many of you may have seen that Gavin Newsom recently said that, once the CDC comes out with the recommendation and the government, that basically California is going to do their own independent study of the results. So as Newsom said, maybe we're looking middle of January of 2021 before we really start to see a vaccine. So given that, we're going to have to, sort of, keep plodding through and really try to figure out what's going on. And just like, COVID has hit very many different occupations differently, different individuals differently. And Ray had a very nice graph that Ray maybe can talk about a little bit. This is, COVID cases by occupation type. Came out from the public health department. And Ray, go ahead. Don't forget you're muted though.
Okay, now I'm off mute. Again, I was on mute because I heard there was some feedback on my mic side here. But again, this is a presentation that the County Public Health Department did last week. And it did speak to the COVID cases as it related to various industry sectors. And so as you can see, there's a large number of, the highest number are in the ag area, which is what it is, I guess. It doesn't seem as if during the shutdown that happened, that the ag sector actually stopped work. Obviously, it's seasonally impacted, and so there were things that had to be done, and so people had to work. Otherwise, the industry would have frankly collapsed. Would have had the impact on our food supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So that makes a little bit of sense. And then the other area with the highest number there, as you can see, is retired and unemployed. And given the makeup of Santa Barbara County, that makes a lot of sense there too. We have a lot of folks who retire here, and they're particularly susceptible to the COVID impacts. And so on the one hand, getting back to the workforce system, we weren't seeing the effects of people in the ag industry coming in or being laid off or displaced, but we were seeing it in some of our other sectors. Obviously, let me see which one is the red one there, which is 399. That's the restaurant, bar, and food preparation area. And so while there were fewer cases there, that may be because that sector was shut down dramatically. Obviously, Santa Barbara in the south part of our county is very heavily influenced by the tourist trade that come in, and they go to restaurants, bars, that sort of thing. The other thing I did notice and wanted to point out is that the other bar there, the one that's yellow, that seems to be fairly high. And so it may be catching some people that were actually in the retail or the restaurant trades also. So that would be my comment about the industry impacts that are happening there. And it seems as if there was, if you broke away and you did stop working, is that you were less impacted as an industry sector than if you continued to work. I think that may be a conclusion, but we probably want to look a little bit more.
No, that's exactly right. I think that, obviously sectors where they had to continue to work, and probably in close quarters, like in many of the ag industry, obviously they're gonna be more susceptible. And leisure and hospitality, hotels, restaurants, bars, et cetera, again, obviously hit very hard. And this is just a crazy graph, right? So this is not for our county, this is for the US. So this is unemployment rates by, just the headline unemployment rate is the blue. That's the one you normally see. that's produced by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then you can see the red one is the unemployment rate of people who work in the leisure and hospitality business. It almost hit 40%. So I want to just be very clear about what's going on with this graph. So if you look at the Great Recession, by the way, you'll see that leisure and hospitality unemployment is a little bit higher. They're typically lower income, less educated in this area, so they do have higher unemployment rates. But they kind of moved, the same. Obviously, during the Great Recession, it got up to about almost 14%, roughly. But then what I want you to notice is how long it took for the leisure and hospitality and our general unemployment rate to fall back to where it was pre-Great Recession. And you can see, it took us about, 7 or 8 years before we got back to an unemployment rate that we saw right before the Great Recession. What happened recently during the pandemic, because the government shut these individuals, companies down and employment down, you can see that the unemployment rate shot up to nearly 40%. Having said that, you can also see that very quickly it came back as we started to reopen some of our businesses. So these people, these entities could stay and hire people back as soon as they can. Obviously, given they have the staying power to stay in business over the next few months. And Kathy's going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the other thing is, on the housing side of things in commercial real estate, so these are delinquency rates. Now, we can talk a little bit about delinquency rates in that because of the government eviction mandate, that many of these people are not declaring delinquency at this point. They don't have to file for it. But you can see what delinquency rates look like during the Great Recession. And again, delinquency rates for single family houses, went from under 2%, to about a little over 11%. So delinquency rates during that time period was just massive. And again, it took a long time for us to come back. And you can see very little effect at present. But again, we have to be very careful to think about these statistics because we don't know how many people are really going to be delinquent or end up being foreclosed, because of the eviction mandate. So you have to be very careful when we look at these data, not to interpret that everything's fine, in the commercial and single family residence sectors. It's just not. That's just not true. So in terms of the housing part of it, Rob, you can talk a little bit about what you guys have done since COVID, and you mentioned that briefly.
Right. So since COVID, we've noticed, of course, a slight softening in the rental market with the student housing population not coming back, and the local landlord community has been more willing to accept our Section 8 voucher holders to accept that rental assistance. So we've been able to issue more vouchers and get those voucher holders housed in the local landlord community. The landlords are seeing the rental assistance as kind of pandemic-proof rental income for them, because even though the voucher holders may have a loss of income, the majority of the rent is coming through the rental assistance by the housing authority. And we've also been able to house 120 people in our own units that we own and manage that I mentioned earlier. And 67 of those who are formerly homeless are now housed. And those are folks that are really susceptible to COVID if they're out on the streets and unsheltered. So we're really pleased about that. Like, as you mentioned, Peter, I'm concerned about the outlook moving forward. That we have the temporary moratoriums on evictions and mortgage forbearance, but that's going to end going into 2021. And what that looks like, I'm concerned if people don't get their incomes back up, they're going to have to continue. They're going to have to begin repaying the rents that they haven't been able to pay, and that's going to be difficult for many households.
I agree with that. That's right. So, by the way, are there still openings in some of the housing authority owned units, or are they pretty much full at this moment?
We tend to stay pretty full. A lot of those openings were those two big developments that I mentioned, but we do have just natural turnover in our units. And so we are able to turn over our own units and also on the voucher program. But we do have a large waiting list. So our wait list for the voucher program is closed, but we have 8,000 households. The majority of those are local to the South Coast that need housing assistance and aren't able to get it because there's just not enough funding from the federal government for that program. And in fact, countywide, the numbers that I have, there's about 18,000 low-income households that would be eligible for housing assistance but don't have it. So they don't have access to affordable housing that's so needed. And when I say low-income households, that's for a family of four, that's 95,200, and a family of two, that's 76,160. So there's a lot of people that fall into that low-income category that are, part of our service and hospitality workers that need the help.
Right, that's a good point. Anything in the works in terms of creating some more of that housing, or?
We have a development on Coda Street in Santa Barbara that we plan to hopefully get the tax credit funding award early next year and build 28 studio units, again, targeted to the homeless. But then we also have a piece of property we purchased at 200 North La Cumbra that we plan to build more family units. We don't have the exact number of units that we want to build there. Anything we do, we want to make sure it fits within the neighborhood and is acceptable to the neighborhood surroundings. So, but that will be for low-income families. And then we have another development we're working on in conjunction with the city to target moderate income households, those that don't qualify for the low-income programs, but fall within 80 to 120% of area median income. And that's at the Carrillo Castillo commuter lot that we're working on some plans now.
Got it. That's great. I mean, and I think, in the housing sector, many people do, there have been many papers written on this, by the way, about, again, I'll call this trickle down, is that, even if you're building middle income housing, the people that were in lower income housing can move into that new housing as their incomes improve, opening up some lower income units for individuals. So, building at almost any level is an important thing. And we don't necessarily have to just focus on one particular area. So that's a good point. And speaking of, whether their incomes come back, like I said, Kathy found us great stuff from JP Morgan Chase. This one's just on restaurants, but you can talk about this a little bit, Kathy.
Yeah, sure. Well, as I think pretty much everybody knows, restaurants got hit the hardest, restaurants and hospitality leisure. But particularly, you can look at the really rapid downslope of both revenues and expenses for restaurants. And it hasn't recovered much. We have a little bit different scenario here in Santa Barbara. I mean, you saw it go down to where they were 60%, off. It's climbed a bit. And I think that 40% off of pre-COVID is kind of average for most of our restaurants. We have a few outliers in our sector around here because Santa Barbara in particular is blessed with great weather, and we're still attracting tourists. And so we see that we have some restaurants that are reporting that they are less than 10% off from where they were last year. But those are the ones that, tend to be down by the beach, have a lot of open area, can get, as much seating as they had previously. Our other businesses are anywhere between, 30 and 40% down. And part of that is also, restriction of operating hours. And now, right now, again, because our hospitality sector is actually doing better than many across the state, I mean, we're reporting that our room occupancy is at about 65%. And on weekends, it's very high. And some of the hotels are actually reporting that their average room rates are 10% above what they were in 2019. And you know, that's sort of astounding. I wouldn't have believed that until I reached out to them and got the statistics. But what we're benefiting from is the fact that Santa Barbara is an easy to drive to location from LA, from Bakersfield, from other places where people want to get away. We're an attractive community. We're, you know, very outdoors. There's the beaches, there's outdoor activities, there's hiking trails, there's everything. The wine tourism is still booming. And so that brings visitors here. And sort of everybody in the hospitality sector does benefit a little bit from that.
Right, sure. But having said that, I mean, basically, and typically, the summer is sort of the big months for many of these types of restaurants, right? So if you're looking at this graph and you see, they have data up until May, but that's still 40% below nationwide what's going on. We're a little bit better, but and we're going to talk about this slide next, but basically cash balances, and buffer of many of these restaurants, historically, it's only been like 27 to 30 days of buffer that many of these types of businesses have. And so if we're going to be going now into the winter season, it's pretty tough. And the other thing you might want to talk about here is sort of the big diversity in these cash balances at these restaurants.
Yeah, well, there's a huge diversity, as you can see in the cash balances. And again, this doesn't apply specifically to Santa Barbara. We have tracked most of our businesses, both restaurants and other types of businesses, retail. And 2 to 3 weeks cash is the maximum. I mean, it is so rare to run into a business that has more than that. What we are seeing is that the businesses who have been able to begin starting to rebuild their cash balances are being extremely cautious. Okay, I think that on one of the other slides we set, and I don't know that it's in the presentation, Peter, but expenses declined behind revenues for most businesses. Is that, well, that's expense.
This is just restaurants, but
that's just restaurants. There was another one, but that
right.
Expenses trailed revenue and declined, but once they got going, they really declined very, very fast. And what we're seeing is that people are not increasing their expenses. So for small businesses, you've got to figure that most of these small businesses have 5 employees or less. If their expenses decline that fast, it had to come from employment or rent.
Good point. Yep.
Only 2 places it can come from. And so what we're seeing is they're not hiring back. They're retaining cash. They're being very cautious. Interestingly enough, people aren't borrowing. That's one thing, we discussed the other day. And I don't know where you want that in the presentation here, but universally, we are seeing at Weave and the banks are seeing that there is no small business loan demand at the moment. Part of that is benefit of PPP and EIDL, and small businesses are sitting on their cash, but they're being very, very cautious. Almost everyone believes that there's going to be another wave and that the winter is going to, produce some pretty harsh conditions. And so people are being conservative, cautious, and, waiting to see what happens.
Right. And, the sad thing is that, the politicians are, fighting over whether or not they're going to, and how much they're going to give poor people who are suffering. Right. So now it's probably not going to be till after the election that, who knows how this is going to play out. But, again, you're right. People are just sitting, waiting and hoping that there's going to be another stimulus package. maybe we'll find a vaccine, but these are all hopes. And right now we have to be delivering, resources to, to various individuals that need them.
Well, and I think that one of the other places where I am worried is specifically about individuals. The PPP and EIDL loans were spread a little bit like peanut butter. And some of our industries, as we've talked about, whether you want to call it a K-shaped recovery or not, but some people are doing pretty well. We got a lot of money out into the community. We dispersed 527,500 in our quick response loans. We're doing restart loans now, and that's the place where we don't see a lot of demand. The Santa Barbara Foundation with the Santa Barbara Better Together Fund and all of the local governments, put out over $400,000 in small grants. And if you look at who got PPP loans, we had over 8,000 PP loans in Santa Barbara County and 12,000 in Ventura. And each county got over $1 billion of PPP loans. So 50% of all employer businesses in Ventura and 63% of all employer businesses in Santa Barbara did receive a PPP loan. So they, again, are utilizing those revenues conservatively.
Right. So what? Go ahead.
I was going to say, if on an individual standpoint, to tie back into your opening slide, what we're worried about is childcare. And we're seeing predictions that over 2 million women, 1 in 4 senior women, is considering leaving the workforce this year.
Right, that's tragic.
Yeah, it's incredibly tragic. It would put us back a very long ways. But it's predominantly the childcare duties and the lack of flexibility in work schedules, and that's where some of the help's got to come.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So Weave has resources still, and we're gonna give links to people so they're able to come come talk to you, and this comes from Ray. Obviously, it's too small to see because there's so many programs, but we're going to have a link to that as well, of the types of programs and facilities that the Workforce Development Board has undergone. And then there's also, of course, the Housing Authority that basically has resources as well, and there's going to be a bunch of links here that you'll be able to go to. To see these various programs and what they've been doing and where people can go. So I think that, overall, as I mentioned at the outset, we have a lot of help here. There is still money available for individuals. Moving forward, I'm with you, Kathy. I think that we have to be, very, very careful. We don't know how much longer this is going to progress. But if people are leaving the workforce like that, because of childcare, it's just really going to be, obviously, very unfortunate. So, with that, I'd like to, maybe talk a little bit about, bring up some of these questions that some people have had. So one question comes from Mitch to Rob. How many gardens of hope would you need to build to meet current needs here in Santa Barbara County?
Oh boy. So the need is
the city.
Yeah. So the need is very great. In the city, I mentioned we have a wait list of 8,000 people for affordable housing, and about 17% of that 8,000 is low-income seniors. So if you're talking about senior housing, we would need to build about 16 more Gardens on Hopes just to meet the demand. And it's very difficult in a built out community like Santa Barbara to find the available land to do that. So one thing that we're also doing is we're looking at our existing properties that we own now that were built in the early 70s, that were built at a fairly low density rate, that we can reconfigure and double the size of the number of units on the property without having an impact on the community. So we're looking at that to do as well. But it'd be very hard to build our way out of the problem with the vast need there is for all the different segments, whether you're seniors or families or disabled individual.
Right. All right. So a little bit more on that, Rob, from an anonymous attendee. I mean, some laws have been passed about, for example, ADU, some design regulations. How much are you seeing that helping on the supply side for housing? Much at all?
I'm not seeing a lot yet on the supply side, but I do have faith that the ADU laws passed throughout the state, that the city has developed their program, that will help. Once those units get built and get ramped up, I would love to see some kind of additional help incentive by the city, that if they give additional fee waivers or even some grants, that if the owner agrees to rent their ADU to a low-income family, they would get that waiver for a period of time. So,
right,
it'll help.
Yep. And how about something like modular housing? I mean, are we seeing any design standards that are differing? That these are very affordable types of houses to build, but there are many regulations against having modular housing on particular parcels. Any hope there?
Yeah, I think there are. With the ADUs, a lot of the plans come as modular type housing. It's how you get them fit in on the lot. But even with multifamily housing, there's a lot of technology nowadays with modular multifamily, having the units constructed off site and stacking them and then skinning them to match what the Architectural Board of Review would require. So we're looking into that even for the Coda Street development, modular type design that would lower the cost and decrease the time it would take to construct the units.
Right. An anonymous attendee asked kind of me, but it goes to everybody. What do we think as will the stimulus deal get done before the election? And even if it does get done, what are we going to see on the impacts? Kathy or Ray, you want to take a shot at that one?
Okay, go ahead, Kathy.
I think they'll probably get something in place before. I'm just not very hopeful that it's going to be precisely targeted enough to meet the needs, because some of the things that we need, they just aren't talking about. I'm cautiously optimistic that if things don't get a lot worse, if people in California are much better about wearing masks and they're finding better ways of circulating and stuff like this. And so I think that with the current measures that people have put in place, we can figure out how to continue to exist. There are lots of other things that we can do besides providing money to help our small businesses get along. I mean, we're trying to look at more where we can step in with childcare resources. And that would be a place where if we can get our local governments to ease up on restrictions of how the childcare facilities where they can be operated, and that would be a big help.
Right.
So I don't know, Ray, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not even cautiously optimistic that before the election we're going to have new legislation. I think there will be something, though. Something will come down the pike at some point in time over the next few months. The question will be what it's going to contain, as you mentioned, Kathy, and what seems to be needed now and what we're trying to pivot towards at the Workforce Board are transitional jobs or short-term jobs. That seems to be something that at least people who now want to get outside and work at least part-time, if we can help them find those sort of jobs, and those would be subsidized jobs probably, that would be helpful until the economy can really bounce back. We know, for example, one of the statistics that I didn't get to mention yet is that replacement jobs have happened between February when the shutdown started to occur, and through August. The State Employment Development Department has been keeping track of whether or not some of those jobs have come back. And in the hospitality area, for example, 49% of the jobs have come back. And that's consistent with what you were saying, Kathy, which is that employers in the restaurant field and in those areas are actually opening up again, but because of social distancing and other issues, they don't have, they can't have all of their customers back. And so consequently, they're also not bringing back all of their staff. So it's only like half the staff have come back at this point. So we need to be able to find something, at least on a temporary basis, for those sort of folks who are not getting called back. And so that's what I would hope would be contained in any new legislation.
Right. And so that just brings another question that I saw here, which is, given that there's so many, people now unemployed, Ray, and what types of retraining programs can people be thinking about for, not the short-term jobs, but the longer-term jobs? So what's the Workforce Development Board doing there?
That's our normal bread and butter, quite frankly, which is long-term career pathway types of opportunities. And so based upon the person's skills and aptitudes, we can help them decide which area they would like to go into and what they would like to be doing. Obviously, we have certain designated industry sectors that are growth sectors in Santa Barbara County, and those are things like healthcare, of course. The growth sectors that are in information, communications technology. There's building and construction. In fact, one of the interesting things about construction is that throughout this entire pandemic situation is that the construction sector has not lost a lot of jobs. I mean, you can't drive around Santa Barbara without seeing some construction going on in the streets. And that's the SB1, and that's the infrastructure type of bill that's happened there, and that's still ongoing. So to answer your question more directly, Peter, we can help people determine what their best aptitudes are and how that fits into long-term career opportunities and jobs and career pathways. So everybody, one size doesn't fit all. But again, we can help them identify where they can fit in here in Santa Barbara counties and the growth industries.
Got it. So Rob, I know you mentioned that one thing you were worried about was, the possibility of the future evictions coming forward and things like that. Any sense of a magnitude on that? I know it's a guess, but
Complete guess, but I think I don't have a magnitude number other than I'm fearful that it's going to be larger than we all are thinking right now, of the number of evictions, the number of foreclosures might inch up as well. I think it's going to be a problem.
Right. No, I certainly agree with that. I think that if and when this new stimulus package comes, I mean, if it's another $1 trillion or so, I think what we really haven't talked about here, and what people are, I think, dismissing a little bit just because of the immediate need of COVID, is all of a sudden the U.S. is $3.5 trillion more in debt, and debt doesn't go away. Now, some debts can go away. So Kathy, maybe I forget what the number is now, where these are going to be forgivable loans from PPP or CARES. Is it a number like 50,000 now? Under that, people are going to be forgiven, or
Yeah, right now they're saying that the number that if you had a loan 50,000 or less, that the whole amount is forgiven. Simple one-page form to get the loan forgiven. A lot of the bankers that I'm talking to and other people we're working with at CDFIs are still expecting that number to go up to 150,000. And that would sort of make sense. You've got about 30% of the loans that were granted under PPP that are under that 100,000. And those are usually the businesses who have with their paperwork and getting everything. A lot of the larger loans went to people with very sophisticated financial departments. They've got no problem, accounting for where their money went. And right now, the SBA is hopelessly behind on processing any kind of forgiveness. So it just makes sense that they're probably going to raise that to 150, but right now it's 50.
Right. So again, it's one of these things. Again, I mentioned this trickle down, but obviously, if this lasts until the next summer, and as businesses, as the eviction moratorium goes away, maybe the PPP loans and CARES is starting to get less. That's obviously going to have to affect us in a big way. And what the unemployment rate's going to do, we just don't know, Ray. Right? I mean, hopefully we can get through this. But with declining revenues in restaurants, and seeing those individuals become unemployed, how fast do you think the unemployment rate can fall, Ray?
Well, it has been coming back down again at the height, and I think that was April, possibly May of this year. It was around 13, possibly 14%, and now it's down back to around the 7%. I think that was the most recent unemployment that just came out, and that would be for the month of September. Right. So it has started to drop. We're just about, of course, again, to go into the season where the ag workers typically are laid off. That happens in November and December. And so that's going to have its effect, but of course it's seasonal and it's expected. We don't know what the Christmas pickup is going to be this year, or the holiday pickup, where people sometimes get jobs, or unemployment rate drops a little bit because people are getting those seasonal jobs. So much shopping is being done online. So my guess would be that it's going to be below 10%, so it'll be in the single digits, but it's not going to be down to 5% or even 6% possibly, which is where we were a year ago. Actually, we're at more like 3% a year ago. Right. So,
but would you expect are you expecting a little bit of a blip up due to the the PPP and CARES maybe not coming through or lasting that long? Evictions, et cetera?
There's no telling if that's the cause and effect aspect. I think that the greater cause and effect aspect about people going back to work is what we've been talking about as an undercurrent throughout the entire conversation here today, and that Kathy talked about, and you started off talking about, Peter, which is the childcare situation. I think that's probably the number one cause effect for people coming back to work. There's just
right. But
you can't go to work if you got your kids. Right.
And the problem with the problem there is that if Kathy's right about those women dropping out, they don't become unemployed. They drop out of the labor force, and so they're not going to be counted as unemployed. And when they actually really would much prefer to be able to work if they possibly could. So again, those are the kinds of things that get masked by some of the statistics we're seeing. So anyway, we're about out of time. It's 1 o'clock. If anybody would like to wrap up a little bit, say anything, that's fine. Some closing remarks. If not, we'll thank everybody for coming. But Ray, do you have a final comment?
Well, I just want to thank you, Peter, and the project for allowing me to participate in this panel. I think that the whole focus that we need to, as a community, start looking at are the questions that were being raised here, which is how can we get people back to work? What are the barriers? What are the obstacles? And I think that we need to start having these discussions. I know that my workforce board is interested in having these discussions, and I hope that there's other forums for similar discussions, because the more people that are looking at it, the sooner we'll come up with some good answers. And of course, we're all got our fingers crossed that the national economy also bounces back, and that we also have a vaccine. So that's mom and apple pie for me at the end.
Great, thanks, Ray. Kathy?
Yeah, well, again, I think that we certainly have everybody's attention. There's nobody that isn't totally thinking about this every minute of every day. And I think that we've taken some reasonable measures. One of the things that has been encouraging here, that has helped locally, is that this community has always been strong at taking care of its own, and it's been strong this time. The organizations that we partners with, whether it's the Ventura County Community Foundation, the EDC, the Santa Barbara Foundation, all of them, we're all working together, and we're looking at helping to solve not just money, because that isn't the only thing that everybody needs, but providing data on where consumer behavior is shifting to, and how businesses can, reset themselves to succeed better. And so I would say, if there's, any benefit to come out of COVID at all, it is, I think, a strengthening of the community, and having everybody understand, that this is where we live. We may buy stuff on Amazon, but this is where we live, and we really want to take care of, everybody here in the community. And I think that there's a lot of resources around to do that.
Right.
So.
And so Rob, I think you'll agree with me that we've never seen sort of different organizations across our county get together as much as they've been getting together. And we see it all the time, public health, housing, you name it. And these groups, we look at the chambers of commerce who have merged, right? The three chambers have merged, realizing that, we have to be all in this together. So, so anyway, Rob, you want to speak a few last words?
Yeah, so I completely agree that we're in this together, and we have to work together in order to lean into these issues and create solutions for the betterment of the residents in our community. And from a housing perspective, I've been called a housing zealot, and if that means that I believe that everybody deserves a safe, decent, affordable place to call home, and that's a foundation, then so be it. I'm a housing zealot, and I do think that we need to ensure that care is taken for our families with children and seniors and disabled, that they do have a place to call home. And again, that's the foundation for everything from my perspective.
Got it. So anyway, I really want to thank you guys. Kathy Odell from Weave, Ray McDonald, Workforce Development Board, Rob Fredericks from the Housing Authority. Again, boots on the street. And I can tell everybody out there that if you have questions, you can reach out to them individually. I mean, these are people that are there for all of us, trying to help. And again, I want to thank everybody. We're going to have all the slides online, so you'll be able to go to those resources. Again, thank you, panelists. Thank you, our sponsors. And take care, everybody.
Hey, thanks, Peter.
Thanks.
Thank you, Peter.